Ok? Bom dia. Bom dia, bom dia. Vamos dar início pontualmente às 9h10. Né? Os 10 minutos de atraso é porque ontem o bicho pegou, tem que começar bebendo água também. A noite foi longa e agora temos que ter ânimo e coragem pela manhã, porque também o dia vai ser longo e o dia vai ser também bastante intenso, como foi ontem. Ontem, muita... Alô? Estão me ouvindo? Alô? Agora sim. Então, o importante para nós hoje é não só repetir, né, o que teve de interessante, as inovações, as informações, mas hoje aproveitar para aumentar essa nossa rede de contatos, de pessoas, de amigos, e também para nós faz muito sentido ter sempre presente que é essa rede que constrói uma web mais interessante, que constrói uma web que está sempre evoluindo, sempre crescendo. Não é à toa que nós colocamos aqui nos slides a lembrança de uma pessoa que nos deixou esse ano, o Everaldo Bechara. O Everaldo Bechara sempre foi um parceiro muito grande da comunidade web. Ele foi um dos diretores do Centro de Treinamento iLearn no Rio de Janeiro e foi a primeira organização no Brasil a se filiar ao W3C, mas mais do que a filiação do W3C, era o compromisso que ele tinha com os padrões web e os padrões abertos, né? E por isso que nós fazemos hoje essa lembrança do Everaldo Bechara, que faz pouco mais de um mês que nos deixou uma lacuna, uma saudade também, e é uma lembrança importante, porque ele também participava dessa rede, participava dessa comunidade que faz a web crescer, faz a web desenvolver, e a ele toda a nossa memória. Fica aqui registrado a passagem dele e a importância que ele teve para nós desde o início do W3C no Brasil. Para começar hoje, nós temos um convidado super especial, super importante para nós também, que nós ficamos muito satisfeitos que ele pôde aceitar o nosso convite, né? Apesar de ter mudado recentemente de organização, mas ele encontrou tempo para vir conversar com a gente. Isso foi muito importante e nós estamos muito contentes de termos aqui conosco o Chris Borchers. O Chris Borchers, por favor, Chris. Ele é diretor executivo da jQuery Foundation. Ele é um cara de Chicago, portanto, é um irmão de Chicago, que está aqui com a gente, já participou ontem de várias atividades aqui também. E hoje ele vai compartilhar com a gente esse tema que nós propusemos, né? Como é que a gente dá um salto para frente, como é que a gente prossegue nessa caminhada da web. E a história do Chris também é uma história que é ligada à história da web. Ele também participa do grupo de User Interface, então ele bota a mão na massa também, e vai ser muito interessante essa possibilidade que nós temos de conversar com ele. E nós armamos essa sessão da manhã de tal forma que ele vai falar e depois nós teremos mais 3 pessoas, né, da nossa comunidade que vai poder também conversar, dialogar, colocar as suas posições sobre o futuro da web. Então vou deixar aqui com o Chris para ele começar a fazer a sua apresentação como Keynote Speaker e depois a gente prossegue no debate. Chris, seja bem-vindo entre a gente. Muito obrigado.
To talk about pushing the web forward. So kind of what I wanted to talk about is a few things. So I want to talk a little bit about the jQuery Foundation and sort of its history and the way we are evolving jQuery to be more than just some libraries that you use, and how jQuery wants to be a body that is helping to move the web forward, whether that's through standards or working with different organizations, just to make the web a better place for everyone. And then I want to get into a couple of a little bit more technical topics to talk about some of the things that I have been involved in personally, either through jQuery or through my former employer as of 2 weeks ago, when I used to work for Red Hat, the Linux company. I was working with them on a mobile project, and we did some stuff with that too. So I want to talk about a couple of things that I've been involved in terms of web standards and evolving standards and how we're working to move the web forward. So the jQuery Foundation is the governing body for jQuery, right? So it's a member-supported nonprofit organization, which means that most of our funding comes from individual members or corporate members, and we are not in it to make a profit. All of that money goes toward maintaining the libraries and working with different bodies to move the web forward. It was started to support jQuery in the community, so its original job was to just maintain those libraries and develop a community around the jQuery libraries. But as I was saying, it's continuing to evolve, and now we are moving it in a different direction. So just a little bit of history. So before there was the jQuery Foundation, there was jQuery. Most of you probably know that it was created by a man named John Resig, and the entire funding for the project was John Resig's PayPal account. So everyone would just donate money directly to him, and then he would use it to fund his own development of the project and help fund others to help him. Then we moved to a group called the Software Freedom Conservancy, and they're a great nonprofit organization that helps software projects and organizations get off of their feet, get on their feet, and establish governance, manage their money in a more appropriate way. And then this last year in February, we formed the jQuery Foundation so that we could manage the organization ourselves and take it in the direction that we want it to go. So recently we've updated our vision and our mission. So the vision is more of that idealistic sort of what we want to do in the world. So the idea is that we want a world in which all web content is built on open standards and is accessible to all users. And so how we intend to do that is through our mission, which sort of restates that, but in a more practical way, which is to improve the open web, making it accessible for everyone by collaborating with and providing tools for the development community. So what I want to do is kind of go through the main pieces of that to describe how we intend to do that. So the first big piece is the open web. So we are big proponents of building things on open standards so that everything is accessible, everything is open to everyone knows how it should work, and everything is standardized. There should be no royalties for using the open web, right? You shouldn't have to pay for using this. And not only now, but in the future either. So with jQuery, you will never have to pay to use it. So being accessible to everyone, what we mean by that is web content should be available to everyone. Anyone, anywhere in the world that has access to the internet should be able to view and use any part of the web. And that means despite any physical or mental or cognitive disabilities or any sort of technological disabilities. So those types of things. So anyone that's using assistive technologies like screen readers or braille boards or magnification, or different color schemes. The applications and websites should work with those things. Or if you're in areas where you're on very slow networks, or you only have access to older devices, the web should be able to be accessible to those people as well, and they shouldn't be left behind. So collaboration is one of our big focuses going forward with the jQuery project. We collaborate with a number of different organizations. We have members that are in W3C working groups. We have members on TC39, which is the governing body for JavaScript. And then we collaborate with a number of different companies. We collaborate with browser vendors like Google and Mozilla and Microsoft. And a couple of specific examples. So how many people have heard of the Polymer project? Okay, so it's a project that's run by Google, and it's a project to bring sort of these new web components to the web, and a part of that is pointer events, which I'm going to get into much more detail in just a little bit. And so we've been collaborating with the Polymer team on their pointer event, Polyfill. Grunt, I don't know how many people are familiar with Grunt, but it's a build tool for JavaScript projects. And we've been involved in that project from the beginning, helping contribute to Grunt, creating different Grunt plugins and maintaining them for building websites, managing JavaScript libraries, all kinds of different cool Grunt plugins. And there's many others, like I said. We've been talking with companies like Adobe. We've been working with, there's a newer CSS framework coming out called Topcoat. We've been working with the developers on that. Recently been talking with the creator of Moment.js, having to do with our dates, managing dates. So a lot of collaboration. That's one of our big focuses going forward. So providing tools. So the obvious ones there are all of our libraries, and they're all available on GitHub, github.com/jQuery. So the obvious ones, right, are jQuery Core, jQuery UI, jQuery Mobile. But some of the other projects that you may or may not realize that we are involved in is Sizzle. Sizzle is the CSS selector engine behind jQuery. So that's how you do those selections to select different parts of the DOM. QUnit, that's our unit testing library. We maintain that as well. We have the jQuery Migrate plugin. That's a really cool plugin that if you're not aware of it, you should check it out. It helps you upgrade from older versions of jQuery, I think something like 1.6 or higher, up to the most recent version. By just dropping this plugin into your project, what it will do is it will fill in, if you're using old deprecated or removed pieces of the jQuery API, it will plug those back in for you so that your apps don't break when you go to a new version. But then it will give you warnings in the console telling you, hey, you're using this removed API, you need to remove that before you fully upgrade. So it's a really cool plugin that we maintain. TestSwarm is another project that we have out there that you can use, and it basically does distributed testing of your project. So you just set up a test swarm, and then anyone in the world can come on any browser that they use and test your test suite for your application, and it keeps statistics so that you know, okay, my app is working in Chrome and Firefox and IE9, but it doesn't work in IE8, something like that. So that's another really cool tool. The other big one is all of our sites, and people are probably not quite aware that all of our sites are also on GitHub. All of the content is in GitHub. So even if you're not able to dig into the code base of jQuery, but you want to contribute, we would love help on the websites. And that's another way that we can collaborate with our user base. They can come and fix typos, fix documentation, all kinds of things. And there's so many sites, like the jQuery site, the API site, the plugin registry, the blog, the bugs, the forum, and that's just jQuery, right? Then there's jQuery UI, jQuery mobile, the Sizzle site, the QUnit sites, the jQuery Foundation site. So that's the one that I'm most involved in because I am the executive director of the foundation. So that's where you can join. There's our contribute.jQuery.com. So this explains to you how you can get involved in the project. There's learn.jQuery.com where we have guest writers, which any of you could be a guest writer if you wanted to be, and come write an article about how to use a particular piece of jQuery, and we'll publish it on our site. And then our events site. We have events all over the world. So, and I probably forgot more sites because we have so many. So the final piece of the mission is community. And so it ties back into that whole collaboration thing. The community, the jQuery community and the web community as a whole is very important to us. But so we try to maintain some multiple outlets for collaboration. So obviously we have our forums, some of those I showed in all of those slides that I just flew through. GitHub, obviously I mentioned before, everything we do is on GitHub. So we keep everything open, everything is out there for you to look at and see how we do it, learn from it, contribute to it. IRC, people are familiar with IRC for chat? We have an entire family of channels on IRC that all start with pound jQuery on the Freenode network. So there's pound jQuery for support. There's pound jQuery meeting where we have all of our team meetings. So if you ever want to get more involved in the projects and know really where we're taking things, go to pound jQuery meeting and see everything that we talk about and where we're taking the projects. And there's a whole bunch more jQuery channels on IRC. We also hold conferences all over the world. So we always have 2 jQuery conferences in the US that we run ourselves. This coming year, 2014, will be in San Diego and Chicago, so I don't have to travel far for that one. And then we have conferences all over the world. So we've had conferences in Toronto, Canada, the UK, Austria, Korea, Russia, and we would love to have one in Brazil. So if anyone's company wants to run a jQuery conference in Brazil, please come talk to me because we'd love to bring a jQuery conference down to Brazil. And speaking of all over the world, so this shows where all of our team members are, and we are all over the world, which makes meetings interesting, especially when we try to meet with this guy, because all of us are in one time, so a lot of times our meetings are at like 2 or 3 in the morning for him. And then some of you may or may not know Raphael. He is on our UI team and on the events team, and he's here in Brazil. He's down here. So feel free to talk to him. If there's things you love about jQuery, things you want to talk about getting involved, come talk to me. If there's things that you're mad about, talk to Raphael. All right, so that's really just sort of the breakdown of the jQuery Foundation. So now what I want to do is get more into a couple of specific new emerging standards that I've been involved in, whether through jQuery or through my previous employer. So the first one that I want to talk about is pointer events. So what do I mean by pointer events? They are this abstract event system that's meant to work with any pointer on your screen. And so when I say pointer, I mean really anything you use on the screen to interact with your application. So whether that's the mouse, your finger, a stylus, a pen, any sort of pointing device on the screen. is called a pointer. And so what this tries to do is abstract out those event APIs so that no matter what pointer is being used, it just works. So I want to run through a history of touch events, because to understand where pointer events are and where they're going, it's important to understand where it all started, because it's actually a long and very complex history and sort of a mess that we've gotten ourselves into and we're trying to fix now. So the first time that touch events emerge is in July of 2008 when iPhone OS 2, so this is before it was even called iOS, iPhone OS 2 is released, and they released touch events. So before that, they were using mouse events. Then the next year, in February of 2009, the jQuery UI project starts to discuss the support of touch events. Later that year, touch events actually land in WebKit. So before that, it was only in iOS, Apple's fork of WebKit, but then in December of 2009, touch events actually land in the main WebKit repo. So then, in July of 2010, Mozilla decides to release Firefox 4 beta, and they released their own version of touch events. So now in the discussion of supporting touch events, now we have to support 2 proprietary APIs. Then in August of 2010, the jQuery project announces jQuery Mobile. And jQuery Mobile is going to use a virtual mouse abstraction to be able to handle these different touch APIs and mouse events. In October of 2010, a man by the name of David Ferfero releases Touch Punch. Touch Punch is an awesome plugin that requires no configuration. You just add it to your project. So you add jQuery, jQuery UI, and then the Touch Punch plugin, and it immediately adds touch support to jQuery UI, and it just works. And it's really great. And actually, even with all of this talk that I'm going to be talking about with pointer events, to this day, we still recommend using that if you need touch support in a jQuery UI application right now. Eventually, we are hoping to move to pointer events, but for right now, that's the way that we officially say to support touch in your jQuery UI application. So then in January of 2011, the initial work began on the W3C touch event specification. And then in March of that year, the final version of Firefox 4 is released, and they're still using their own version of touch events. So we still have to support multiple touch APIs. So then in May of that year, the first working draft of the W3C touch event specification is released. And so now we're getting to a point of trying to standardize these touch events, right? So that's a good thing. Then in September, IE10 developer preview is released. And they decide to release their own version of events to handle touch and mouse, and they call these pointer events. Now we have 3 APIs that we have to keep track of. And so this is just getting kind of crazy, right? So in November 2011, when jQuery Mobile 1.0 is finally released, we decide our virtual mouse implementation is only going to support mouse events and the WebKit touch events. So not the Firefox touch events and not the Microsoft pointer events. And that was just for simplicity, because WebKit touch events were in most browsers by that point, and mouse events obviously were in all browsers, so it was just for simplicity. Also in November, Apple decides that they have patents on their touch events. And so now this delays the W3C working group that is working on this touch event specification. And so that's no good, because now all of this progress we were making to standardize these touch events is sort of at a halt, because you don't want to infringe on Apple's patents. And so a patent advisory group was formed to start investigating where to go from there. So then also in November of 2011, jQuery UI decides, okay, this is kind of crazy. There's so many event models that we have to try to maintain. Why don't we abstract everything down to as simple as we can get it so it doesn't matter what you're using? And so we create the interactions branch, which still exists in the jQuery UI repo. It has not been merged into master yet because we're still finding our way. But what that does is really cool because it breaks down interactions to their very simplest form. So no matter what interaction you're doing with a web application, everything has a start, 0 or more movements, and a stop. And that encompasses really any interaction you want to make with your application. And so what we've done is created this abstraction so that you can just say, I want to be able to drag this item. And you can plug in any event system you want, whether that's the mouse events or the touch events or the pointer events, and it would work. And it'll work with any interface device. So I've done presentations in the past using this branch where I'm interacting with UI widgets with an Xbox controller. And it just works through the Gamepad API. So it's really cool. So we get to April 2012, and Scott Gonzalez, who is the lead developer on the jQuery UI project, is really frustrated with the landscape of these event models. So he writes a blog post explaining his frustrations and urging Microsoft to actually submit a proposal for their pointer events. Because after doing a lot of research, it was really determined that their pointer event system, even though it was a third one added to the ones that already exist, was actually the most sane because it would work with any input device, right? So Microsoft, whether it was from Scott's urging or not, later that year did submit a pointer event proposal. Immediately after it was submitted, a pointer events working group was formed, and all of the browser vendors, in one way or another, expressed support for this proposal, whether it was they actually want to support and implement this proposal once it's standardized, or they at least support the spirit of it and want to see where it goes, except for Apple. And even to this day, they still, the last I heard, are not on board with pointer events. And likely that's because they have patents on touch events. So we're still working on them. So now we finally get to this year. In January, Firefox 18 is released, and they finally removed their proprietary touch event system. So I think it was like Firefox 6 or so, they added the WebKit touch events. So they had both the WebKit touch and their own touch events, and then finally by Firefox 18 they removed their own touch event system. Thank you, Mozilla. So then in February, Microsoft announces Hand.js. So they started building their own polyfill for pointer events so that users of other browsers could start using pointer events in their applications, right? And it was an okay polyfill. It did not implement the entire specification that was being written. It had just gotten started, but it was a very good start. Then in March, we decided to start prototyping our own polyfill because the Hand.js polyfill wasn't quite doing everything, so we wanted to see what we could do on our own. And so we use the jQuery special event system. Within jQuery, you can create events and modify their properties and everything, and it's a really cool event system. But the only issue is it's jQuery specific, right? So we want people to use jQuery if they need it, but we don't want to force jQuery on people, right? So if you don't need it, we don't want you to have to include it just so that you can have pointer events. So it was more just an exploratory polyfill, just to see what it would look like. And at the same time, we started discussing with Microsoft OpenTech the use of hand.js within jQuery, so that hand.js could be used by people that didn't want to use jQuery, but then jQuery could also use it so the people that are using jQuery would get pointer event polyfill. So then later that year, touch events finally become W3C proposed recommendations, and that's 5 whole years after the iPhone OS 2 was released, where touch events first emerged. Also in May, after multiple discussions, we actually decided with Microsoft OpenTech that the jQuery implementation was better than hand.js. And the reason being is hand.js was great, but in order for them to support the older versions of their own browsers, so IE 6, 7, 8, they would have to duplicate a lot of stuff that jQuery had already done. And so it was decided that we might as well just make that jQuery requirement to be able to do it. The very next month, more polyfills start popping up from individual developers, different organizations. Which is a good thing. That shows that there's interest in these pointer event things, right? But it's too many and it's too fragmented, and there's too many polyfills that need to be supported. So we actually, the jQuery team, myself, Scott Gonzalez, the jQuery UI lead, and Dave Methvin, the president and the jQuery core development lead, met with representatives from Google for Polymer and representatives from MS OpenTech, and we actually decided that we should all collaborate on Polymer's pointer event system, because theirs was actually the most complete. It implemented almost every part of the specification that is still being worked on right now. The only problem is it only supports modern browsers, so only IE, I can't remember if it's 9 or 10 and up, and then the most recent versions of the other browsers. And obviously for jQuery, we need support back to IE 6. So what we decide is we'll all contribute to Polymer, and jQuery will be responsible for making those older IE browsers work with Polymer. So that's kind of the history of where we're at up until now with pointer events. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of an illustration. This is a very simplified example because there's a lot more involved in this, but just to sort of illustrate, so if you want to support mouse events, touch events, and pointer events right now, this is what you have to do, right? You have to have handlers for those mouse events. So if you're wanting to drag something, so you need to know when the mouse goes down, know when the mouse moves, know when the mouse comes back up. Same thing for touch, same thing for MS Pointer. And you have to have handlers for all these. And it's even more complicated than that because the touch implementations and the MS Pointer implementations, for compatibility, also fire the mouse events. So now you're having the issue of, I touch this thing that I want to drag, and it fires my touch handler, and it also fires my mouse down handler. And so you have to handle that yourself. Pointer events get rid of that because there's no need to fire both because there's only one event that you're maintaining. So you go from something like that to just, I want to listen to pointer down, pointer move, pointer up. So like I said, it's a very oversimplified example, but it just shows you that it cuts out 2/3 of that code, and it probably ends up being more. And less code is good, right? So less things that can break, less things you have to test. and it's just prettier, right? When you look at code and there's less of it, it looks nice. So that's kind of where we're at on pointer events. We're still working, obviously, we're still working with Polymer. What I'm working on now is actually integrating our work that we've done for making Polymer work in old IE and implementing that into our interactions branch, which I mentioned earlier, so that no matter what device you're using, if it can emit some sort of start, move, and stop, it will work with jQuery UI. And so what we want people to do is start using pointer events. All you have to do is you go to Polymer's pointer events repo and download that. And then our jQuery pointer events, if you need to support older versions of IE, you throw our little bit of code in there as well, and then you get that support that you need. And you can start using pointer events. Because if people start using it and people start liking it and it starts getting used a lot, it gives us more ammo to go to these browser vendors and say, you need to implement this, we need to standardize this and get it implemented in the browser so that we can stop including all of this extra JavaScript and just have the native events be there. Okay, so the last topic that I wanted to talk about is this new push API that's being, a specification is being worked on for the web. So this is not push that you think of with like native applications, right? Like your iPhones or Androids. This is push notifications for the web. So hopefully, I'm going to cross my fingers and maybe say a prayer to the presentation gods. I'm hoping that this little demo will work. So if you want, you don't have to, but if you want, on any device, whether it's your laptop, your mobile device, whatever, if you can go to pushtalk.chrisborchers.com and just let that fire up. And what you're going to see is my presentation. So I'll give everybody a minute just to bring that up if they want. And so what this demonstration is it's not an appropriate use of the push API, but it just shows how it works. So Reveal.js, which is what I'm using for this presentation, so this is a web-based presentation framework, it has this sort of functionality built in where it will basically broadcast to the audience that a slide has changed and update the slide for them. What I've done is I've not used their implementation and used the push API to do that. So crossing my fingers, hopefully when I change this slide, it might take a minute, but hopefully everyone's slides start to update. Maybe just throw your hand up if your slides update. Yeah? Might take a minute. Yeah, good. People are starting to see them update. Cool. Usually the first time it takes a little while and hopefully they get faster. But so hopefully this will keep you in sync with me, and you can feel free to, if you uncheck the little checkbox, you can go look at my slides, you can look ahead and see what I'm going to talk about. You can go back if there was something that I was talking about earlier and you want to look at. And then if you ever want to come back, you can hit that sync now button or check the box, and the next time I change a slide, you'll sync back up with me. So what I want to do is talk about a little bit of the difference in messaging. So when I talk push API, I'm not talking web notifications. So these are two different specifications. The push API is literally pushing information from the server to your application. Web notifications are a JavaScript API that pops up notification outside of the browser, outside of your web application, to give information to the user. Now, web notifications can be used in conjunction with push. So you would push a message to your application, and then your application could pop up a web notification letting your new user know that they have a new email or whatever. And you might have seen that if you use Gmail. If you're using Gmail in Chrome, I believe, and you get a new email, a notification will pop up even if you're not looking at the application. So, like I said, I'm not talking about the native push APIs, but just to give a quick overview, so all of the different vendors have their own, right? So Apple has the Apple Push Notification System, Android has Google Cloud Messaging, Windows has MPNS, you probably see a theme here, they all have their own. BlackBerry has the BlackBerry Push service. And it kind of makes sense that they all have their own, right? Because for security, I mean, it's pushing things directly to the operating system. So for security, they want to know that it's coming from their own network. So it makes sense. What Simple Push gives you is the ability to push messages to web applications. So Mozilla developed this Simple Push API for Firefox OS so that they could, because Firefox OS is based on web technologies, and people with smartphones are used to being able to get push notifications, so they had to develop some sort of push system for web applications. And it also works in Firefox for Android and Firefox Desktop. I'm not sure if it's landed there yet, but it should soon if it hasn't. And the reason I say and more is because when I was working for Red Hat, we're working on a polyfill to make it work in other browsers, which is how, if you're not using Firefox, it's actually working. And I'll get into more of that in just a second. So I've mentioned sort of two things talking about the same thing. So I've been talking about the Push API and Simple Push. So the Push API, the first sort of drafts that I saw of the specification were very complex. It seemed as though the Push API was trying to do everything that native push messaging was doing, which, I mean, it makes sense. If you're used to that, why not try to emulate it, right? But it was just so complex. So then Mozilla came into the picture. And I love that fox, don't you? Isn't it beautiful? So they enter the picture and they're like, this is too complex for the system that we want to build. We just want something like a doorbell, right? We just want to let the application know that there is new information available, and then let the application do what it wants to do with that information. So that's when the Push API became Simple Push for the most part. So if you read the Push API, the working draft for the specification now, it looks very much like the Simple Push API. And I wasn't involved in those conversations. I'm not sure how that collaboration between Mozilla and the people working on the specification are AT&T and Telefonica. Somewhere along the way, they got together because there's actually a thank you to the Mozilla guys for their help. And now the Push API looks very much like Simple Push, which in my opinion is a good thing, because simple is good. So I mentioned a little bit ago AeroGear. So that's the project that I was working on before I started working for the jQuery Foundation. And so there's a lot more to it than this Simple Push polyfill. It's basically a mobile development set of frameworks for JavaScript, Android, iOS, Apache Cordova, for like enterprise Java developers to sort of get into that client-side development. But one of the things we worked on was a polyfill for Simple Push to be able to use that across browsers. And so we created this Simple Push client based on the Simple Push API specification so that we can use push across browsers. We also implemented our own server. So Mozilla has a server out there that you can use. It's something like push.services.mozilla.org, I think, or .com. It's one of those. And you can use their push service, and it's wide open. And if you want to start using push, you can use their server. And it's implemented in Go language. One of my teammates, when I was on the AeroGear team, rewrote that entire server in Java. So we have that version. So if you're familiar with Java, you could take a look at that. But the important thing is both APIs are the same because of the specification. Because Mozilla laid out such a detailed and good specification, we were able to implement a server in Java when they had implemented one in Go, and they both work with both clients, which is really cool. So hopefully I don't scare too many people off, but just want to look at a little bit of code just to kind of show you how it works if you were going to want to start using it, or at least playing with it. So this one is kind of optional. Sort of to be a good citizen, you can check if you already have endpoints registered for push notifications, and then determine whether or not you need to register a new one. The server doesn't care. If you just keep registering new endpoints, it'll be fine with it, and it'll keep sending them out. The problem is then the server's sending messages to clients that don't exist anymore. So it's good to get the registrations before you start creating more to see if you need to. But the important piece here is that whether you're using Mozilla's native implementation in Firefox OS or Firefox for Android or whatever, or you're using the AeroGear polyfill, what we've done is the push object is added to the navigator object, and so that's how you access the push notifications. So to register a new endpoint, you just say navigator.push.register. You pass it nothing. You just say, give me a new endpoint that I can use for push notifications. And then what it'll do is it'll create a unique URL for that single client and say, okay, when you need push notifications, send them here, and I know who to send them to. And then similarly to unregister, that endpoint that you just created, you pass it to unregister, and it'll tell the server, I don't need that anymore, you can clean it up. Very simple. So as of when I wrote this, and they may have actually removed the prefix now, I don't remember, but Mozilla's way is they have Moz set message handler and that you listen for this push event, and that's how you know that you've received a new push notification. When you're using the AeroGear polyfill, it's just set message handler because that's what the specification says. So using the AeroGear polyfill to instantiate a simple push client, you just pass the constructor the URL for the server that you're using, whether that's Mozilla's server or the server that we created. If you set one of those up yourself, you can point to that URL. Use native. What that is a flag that we've added. It's not part of the specification, but it's a flag that we've added to say, if you're on Firefox OS, use the built-in notification system. And the reason we did that is because on Firefox OS, you can actually get real notifications on the device, even if the web application is closed. So it'll still work on the other ones for the web, but on Firefox OS, if you say use native, it will pop up native notifications in Firefox OS. And then on connect is where you do the real work. So basically the on-connect callback is fired once you've actually established a connection to that server that you specified. And so this is actually, it's kind of chopped up a little bit. I've taken some things out to simplify it, but this is the code that's being used in those slide systems that you're seeing. And so basically what I'm saying is I register a new endpoint that I'm going to call my slide change request, and then I specify an on-success event. So when I actually get a success event from the registration call, that might not make as much sense. So the AeroGear project also has a server called the Unified Push server that we've created, and it's just this server that we've made so you can send one message to it, and it will push messages to APNS, GCM, the Microsoft network, the BlackBerry network, and Simple Push. So what we do is register with our unified push server and say, here's the endpoint for this client. If you get push messages, if you need to send push messages to this client, send it to this address. But you don't have to use our unified push server. You can just use your own server-side application. You can just store them locally if you only care about the current session. The option is up to you. That's what's beautiful about this, is that it's up to you. It's up to the developer. And then continuing that same on connect callback, this is where we set our message handler. So when a push notification comes in, this navigator.mos notification, so that's the code that says if we're on Firefox OS and the application is not visible, pop up a native notification. So you would only need that if you actually are programming for Firefox OS. And then it just determines if that little checkbox on your slides is checked, and if it is, it tells that client to go ahead and change the slide that the presenter is on. So it's pretty simple, right? So really, the whole point of this was just to show that the jQuery Foundation is very interested in sort of changing our vision and our mission going forward. So we're not just about those jQuery libraries. We are about making the web a better place. So whether that's getting involved in standards, collaborating with the browser vendors, collaborating with individuals. I mean, if you have feedback on something we're doing or some way we can make the web better for you or for your users, let us know, because that's really what it's about, right? So with that, I thank you.